There is a warm light. Not bright. Not dim. Just warm. It does not move. It does not flicker. It stays. The space around it is quiet. Not empty. Not full. Quiet. The light does not ask to be noticed. It does not draw attention. It simply exists. There is no reason to look directly at it. No reason to turn away. The light remains. The silence around it feels soft. Not heavy. Not sharp. Just still. Nothing needs to happen here. The light stays warm. Consistent. Unchanging. It does not signal time. It does not suggest action. It is not waiting. The space holds the light gently. Without effort. There is no sound that needs to be followed. No sound that needs to be blocked. Silence remains. The light continues to be present. It does not arrive. It does not leave. It has always been here. There is no edge to the light. No center to focus on. It spreads evenly. Without intention. The silence does not react. It does not deepen. It does not thin. It simply remains. Nothing shifts in the space. Nothing approaches. Nothing withdraws. The light stays where it is. There is no need to think about it. No need to name it. It does not need meaning. The silence holds everything evenly. Without preference. The light does not guide. It does not lead. It does not suggest a direction. It is just warm. The space remains still. Reliable. Calm. There is no task here. No responsibility. Nothing needs to be completed. The light remains unchanged. The silence remains unchanged. Time does not announce itself. Moments pass quietly. They do not stack. They do not separate. The light stays constant. It does not grow. It does not fade. The silence stays neutral. There is nothing unfamiliar here. Nothing to adjust to. Everything is already settled. The space feels safe. Not because it protects, but because it does nothing. The light continues to exist. The silence continues to hold. Nothing interrupts. There is no reason to stay alert. No reason to prepare. Nothing is about to begin. The light remains warm. The silence remains steady. Everything stays. The light does not change. The silence does not respond. They remain as they are. Nothing else is required. The warm light remains. It has not shifted. It has not dimmed. It is still there. The silence around it feels unchanged. Steady. Neutral. Nothing presses in. Nothing pulls away. The light does not belong to a source. It is simply present. It fills the space without filling it. There is no boundary where it begins. No place where it ends. The warmth does not spread. It does not concentrate. It stays even. The silence does not deepen. It does not thin. It remains consistent. There is no sound asking for attention. No sound asking to be ignored. Everything stays quiet without effort. The light does not respond to time. Moments pass without marking it. Nothing announces itself. The space feels settled. Not prepared. Not unfinished. Just settled. There is no reason to adjust. No need to move closer. No need to step back. The light remains where it is. The silence remains where it is. Nothing changes the balance. The warmth does not invite emotion. It does not comfort. It does not excite. It simply exists. The space holds this without strain. There is no contrast here. No sharpness. No shadow that matters. The light does not cast meaning. The silence does not remove meaning. Meaning is unnecessary. The moment does not ask to be remembered. It does not ask to pass. It simply continues. The warmth stays constant. Reliable. Uninvolved. The silence stays neutral. Uninterested. Calm. There is no direction in the space. No forward. No backward. Everything remains level. Nothing is waiting to happen. Nothing is finishing. The light does not signal rest. It does not signal wakefulness. It is neither. The silence does not guide awareness. It does not resist it. Awareness can remain. Or loosen. Either is fine. The space does not respond. The warmth remains. The silence remains. Nothing requires effort. There is no edge to arrive at. No center to focus on. The light stays even. The silence stays even. The space does not ask anything. Nothing else is needed. The warm light remains. It has been here. It is still here. Nothing about it has changed. The silence around it feels familiar now. Unremarkable. Stable. There is nothing new to notice. The light does not draw the eye. It does not recede. It simply stays. The space holds steady. No tension. No release. Everything feels settled into place. The warmth is even. Not spreading. Not fading. It does not suggest comfort. It does not suggest alertness. It remains neutral. The silence does not feel empty. It does not feel full. It is just present. There is no reason to listen closely. No reason to block anything out. Nothing asks for attention. The light does not belong to a moment. It does not mark time. Moments pass quietly. Without shape. Nothing announces their passing. The space feels consistent. Reliable. Unchanging. There is no contrast to follow. No shift to track. Everything remains level. The light stays warm. The silence stays steady. Nothing presses forward. Nothing pulls back. The balance does not move. There is no task here. No expectation. Nothing needs to be held in mind. The light does not guide awareness. It does not resist it. Awareness can rest. Or drift slightly. Either way, nothing responds. The silence remains neutral. Uninvolved. The space does not react. There is no beginning forming. No ending approaching. Everything stays in the middle. The warmth does not deepen. It does not thin. It stays constant. The silence does not close in. It does not open up. It remains unchanged. There is no reason to check. No reason to adjust. Nothing has shifted. The light remains. The silence remains. The space feels ordinary now. In the best way. Nothing stands out. Nothing fades away. Everything is already in place. The moment does not require memory. It does not require attention. It continues without effort. The warmth stays even. The silence stays even. Nothing moves the balance. There is no signal to follow. No cue to respond to. The space remains as it is. The light does not change. The silence does not change. Nothing else is needed. The warm light continues to remain. Nothing draws attention to it anymore. It has become part of the space. The silence feels settled, unremarkable, stable. There is nothing new to observe. The light does not stand out. It does not fade into the background. It simply belongs. The space holds everything evenly. Without emphasis. Without absence. Nothing shifts the balance. The warmth feels consistent. It does not spread outward. It does not gather inward. It stays even. The silence carries no message. It does not respond. It does not resist. It simply stays. There is no reason to check the space. No reason to scan. Everything is already known. The light does not suggest rest. It does not suggest movement. It remains neutral. The silence does not feel heavy. It does not feel thin. It remains unchanged. Time passes quietly. Without signals. Without markers. Moments dissolve as they arrive. The light remains unaffected. The space feels reliable. Predictable. Calm. Nothing interrupts. There is no contrast forming. No difference to follow. Everything remains level. The warmth does not invite emotion. It does not repel it. It exists without demand. The silence does not guide awareness. It does not block it. Awareness can stay. Or drift slightly. Nothing reacts. The space does not move forward. It does not pause. It simply remains. The light stays warm. The silence stays neutral. Nothing presses in. Nothing releases. The balance holds. There is no expectation forming. No completion approaching. Everything stays in place. The moment feels ordinary. Familiar. Unchanged. Nothing needs to be remembered. Nothing needs to be anticipated. The light does not change. The silence does not change. The space remains stable. There is no need to prepare. No need to let go. Nothing requires effort. The warmth remains even. The silence remains even. Everything stays as it is. Nothing else is needed. The warm light remains. But it no longer feels distant. It no longer feels separate. It is simply there. The silence feels closer now. Not louder. Not deeper. just closer. Nothing has changed. And yet, there is less space to notice it. The light does not stand apart from the space. It blends gently. There is no boundary to observe. The warmth feels softer. Not weaker. Not stronger. Just softer. The silence does not surround the space anymore. It fills it. There is no edge where it begins. Nothing draws awareness outward. Nothing pulls it inward. Awareness rests where it is. The light does not need to be looked at. It does not need to be remembered. It remains without effort. The silence carries no instruction. No suggestion. It simply holds. Time feels less defined. Moments no longer feel separate. They arrive and dissolve quietly. The space feels smooth. Without texture. Nothing interrupts. The warmth does not contrast with the silence. They coexist without distinction. There is no difference to track. Awareness does not need to stay alert. It does not need to drift. It can remain unfocused. The silence feels continuous. Unbroken. The light remains present. But less distinct. It does not fade. It simply blends. The space no longer feels measured. There is no sense of distance. Everything feels evenly near. Nothing needs to be named. Nothing needs to be held. The moment feels thin. Not fragile. Just thin. The silence carries everything evenly. The warmth feels neutral. Unremarkable. The light no longer marks the space. It becomes part of it. There is no reason to check. No reason to adjust. Awareness loosens slightly. Without instruction. Nothing responds. The silence does not react. The light does not signal. They remain. Time passes without emphasis. Moments do not collect. They simply pass through. The space feels continuous. Without segments. There is no direction here. No forward. No backward. Everything stays level. The warmth does not pull attention. It does not release it. It remains balanced. The silence feels uninterrupted. Reliable. Nothing presses in. Nothing opens up. The space holds steady. There is no sense of waiting. No sense of completion. Everything stays in between. The light remains. The silence remains. Awareness does not need to decide. Nothing else is required. The warm light remains. It is still warm. Still even. But it feels less like something to notice. It feels like part of the silence. The silence stays close. Not pressing. Not pulling. Just close. Nothing changes. Nothing begins. The light does not stand apart. It does not feel separate from the space. It blends gently. There is no clear place to look. No clear place to rest attention. Everything feels smooth. The warmth remains. But it has less outline. Not fading. Not dimming. Just blending. The silence feels continuous. As if it has always been this way. There is no break in it. Time feels less distinct. Moments do not line up. They do not form a sequence. They arrive. They soften. They dissolve. Nothing needs to be held. The light remains present. But it does not feel important. It does not mark anything. The silence carries everything evenly. Awareness can stay low. Without effort. There is no reason to check the space. No reason to confirm. Nothing is missing. Nothing is waiting. The warmth stays neutral. The silence stays neutral. They remain together. Without contrast. The space does not feel wide. It does not feel narrow. It simply feels near. The light does not pull the mind. The silence does not push it. Everything stays balanced. There is no task forming. No question forming. Nothing needs an answer. The light remains. The silence remains. The space remains. The warmth does not invite emotion. It does not invite thought. It remains simple. The silence remains simple. Awareness loosens slightly. Then loosens again. Not forced. Not guided. It happens naturally. There is no clear boundary between the warmth and the silence. They overlap. The light becomes part of the quiet. The quiet becomes part of the light. Nothing needs to be separated. Time continues without emphasis. Moments pass without weight. The space remains unchanged. The warmth remains even. The silence remains even. Nothing interrupts. Nothing signals. Nothing asks. The light does not need to be remembered. The silence does not need to be understood. They remain. Awareness does not need to decide. It can remain unfocused. The space holds everything gently. The light remains warm. The silence remains close. Nothing else is required. The warmth is still here. It does not announce itself. It does not ask to be noticed. It simply remains. The light feels settled into the space. Not placed. Not positioned. It belongs without effort. The silence feels thick in a gentle way. Not heavy. Not enclosing. Just present. Nothing in the space suggests change. Nothing suggests movement. The warmth does not rise. It does not fall. It stays even. The silence does not expand. It does not recede. It stays close. There is no clear moment to focus on. No moment that feels separate from the next. Time moves without forming steps. Moments soften as they appear. They do not line up. They do not collect. They pass through quietly. The light does not guide awareness. It does not resist it. Awareness drifts without direction. Then rests. Then drifts again. There is no need to follow it. The warmth does not invite emotion. It does not remove it. It simply does not engage. The silence holds everything without response. There is no contrast between now and before. No difference worth noticing. Everything blends. The space feels continuous. As if it has no sections. There is no beginning here. No ending approaching. Just continuation. The light remains warm. Unchanging. Reliable. The silence remains neutral. Uninvolved. Nothing presses against awareness. Nothing pulls it forward. The balance stays steady. There is no need to remember anything. No need to anticipate. Nothing requires completion. The warmth does not comfort. It does not disturb. It remains indifferent. The silence remains indifferent. They coexist without interaction. Awareness no longer feels like something that needs to stay alert. It can remain loose. Unfixed. The space does not react to this. The light does not change when awareness softens. The silence does not deepen. Everything stays the same. Time continues without emphasis. Without signal. Moments arrive quietly. They dissolve quietly. Nothing marks their passing. The warmth feels familiar now. Not because it repeats, but because it never leaves. The silence feels familiar for the same reason. There is nothing new to observe. Nothing to check. Everything already feels known. The space feels smooth. Without texture. Without edge. There is nowhere for attention to land. So it rests where it is. The warmth remains. The silence remains. They do not need each other. They do not oppose each other. They simply remain together. Awareness loosens further. Without instruction. Without resistance. It happens naturally. There is no boundary between inner and outer. No clear distinction. Everything feels evenly near. The light does not feel distant. The silence does not feel surrounding. They are simply present. The space does not feel large. It does not feel small. It feels undefined. Time feels thin. Not fragile. Just thin. Moments no longer feel separate enough to count. The warmth stays even. The silence stays even. Nothing interrupts this balance. Nothing signals a change. Nothing suggests an end. The space remains steady. Awareness does not need to decide anything. It does not need to choose rest or movement. It can remain undefined. The warmth does not react. The silence does not react. They continue. Nothing else is required. The warmth remains steady. It does not feel closer. It does not feel farther. It stays where it is. The silence continues without change. Unbroken. Even. Nothing interrupts. There is no reason to notice the moment. No reason to let it pass. It simply continues. The light does not stand out. It does not disappear. It blends quietly into the space. The silence holds everything without effort. Without reaction. Awareness stays loose. Not focused. Not drifting far. Just loose. There is no signal to follow. No cue to respond to. Nothing forms. The warmth does not deepen. It does not thin. It remains neutral. The silence remains neutral. They coexist without movement. Time feels slow. Not long. Not short. just slow. Moments arrive without shape. They dissolve without trace. Nothing marks them. The space feels soft. Not heavy. Not empty. Just present. Awareness does not need to stay alert. It does not need to let go. It can remain undefined. The light does not react. The silence does not react. They remain unchanged. There is no beginning here. No ending approaching. Only continuation. The warmth stays even. The silence stays even. Nothing presses in. Nothing releases. The balance holds. Nothing asks for attention. Nothing withdraws. Everything stays. The space remains steady. Unmoving. Awareness rests naturally. The light remains. The silence remains. Nothing else is required. The warmth remains. It is still here. It has not shifted. Nothing around it has changed. The silence feels steady. Unmoving. Unresponsive. Nothing interrupts. The light does not ask for attention. It does not draw focus. It simply remains present. The space feels calm. Not quiet in contrast. Just calm. There is no sense of progression. No sense of pause. Everything continues evenly. The warmth does not rise. It does not fade. It stays even. The silence does not deepen. It does not thin. It stays even. Time passes without form. Moments do not separate. They pass without leaving traces. Nothing marks them. The light does not guide awareness. It does not resist it. Awareness can remain low. Without effort. The space does not react. There is no reason to adjust. No reason to check. Nothing requires confirmation. The warmth does not comfort. It does not disturb. It remains neutral. The silence remains neutral. They exist together without interaction. Nothing pulls attention forward. Nothing pulls it back. Everything stays in place. The space feels settled. Not finished. Not unfinished. Just settled. The light remains unchanged. The silence remains unchanged. Nothing presses in. Nothing releases. The balance stays. Awareness does not need to hold. It does not need to let go. It can remain undefined. The warmth does not signal rest. It does not signal wakefulness. It is neither. The silence does not signal anything. Time continues quietly, without emphasis. Moments arrive. Moments dissolve. Nothing lingers. The space feels familiar. Not because it repeats, but because it never leaves. The warmth stays present. The silence stays present. Nothing changes the state. The light does not grow distant. It does not come closer. It stays where it is. The silence stays where it is. Everything remains. Awareness rests naturally, without direction. The space holds everything evenly. There is no beginning here. No ending approaching. Only continuation. The warmth remains steady. The silence remains steady. Nothing else is required. The warmth remains steady. It does not feel new. It does not feel old. It simply continues. The silence stays unchanged. It does not deepen. It does not thin. It stays as it is. Nothing in the space suggests movement. Nothing suggests pause. Everything continues evenly. The light does not shift. It does not flicker. It stays constant. The silence does not respond. It does not react. It remains neutral. Time passes quietly. Without form. Without markers. Moments do not separate. They do not stack. They move through gently. Nothing calls attention. Nothing fades away. Everything stays. The warmth does not invite thought. It does not invite feeling. It remains uninvolved. The silence remains uninvolved. They exist together without interaction. Awareness can remain low. It does not need to rise. It does not need to fall. It stays loose. The space does not react to this. Nothing changes. The light does not guide. The silence does not guide. They simply remain. There is no reason to remember anything. No reason to anticipate. Nothing is about to happen. The warmth remains even. The silence remains even. They do not pull awareness. They do not release it. Everything stays balanced. The space feels settled. Not finished. Not unfinished. just settled. The light remains present. The silence remains present. Nothing interrupts. Time continues quietly. Moments arrive. Moments dissolve. Nothing lingers. The warmth feels familiar. Not because it repeats, but because it never leaves. The silence feels familiar for the same reason. Nothing feels different. Nothing feels new. Everything is already in place. The light does not move closer. It does not move away. It stays where it is. The silence stays where it is. Awareness rests naturally. Without direction. Without effort. The space holds everything evenly. There is no beginning forming. No ending approaching. Only continuation. The warmth remains steady. The silence remains steady. Nothing else is required. The warmth remains. It does not change. It does not move. It stays. The silence stays with it. Unmoving. Unresponsive. Nothing shifts. The light remains soft. It does not grow. It does not fade. It stays as it is. Nothing asks for attention. Nothing releases it. Everything stays even. The warmth does not comfort. It does not disturb. It remains neutral. The silence remains neutral. They exist without interaction. Time continues quietly. Without shape. Without direction. Moments do not separate. They do not gather. They pass. Nothing marks them. The light does not guide awareness. It does not resist it. Awareness can stay low. Very low. There is no reason to rise. No reason to sink further. It stays. The warmth remains steady. The silence remains steady. Nothing presses in. Nothing pulls away. The balance holds. The space feels unchanged. Not empty. Not full. Just present. Nothing forms. Nothing dissolves. Everything stays the same. The light does not move closer. It does not move away. It remains where it is. The silence remains where it is. Awareness does not need to follow anything. There is nothing to follow. Nothing happens. The warmth does not signal rest. It does not signal wakefulness. It remains between. The silence remains between. Time passes without emphasis. Moments arrive. Moments dissolve. Nothing lingers. Nothing repeats. Nothing progresses. Everything continues. The space feels steady. Unmoving. Undisturbed. The warmth remains. The silence remains. Nothing reacts. Awareness can soften further. Without effort. There is no direction to hold. No direction to release. Everything stays loose. The light does not change. The silence does not change. They remain. Nothing is expected. Nothing is remembered. There is no need to notice anything. The warmth stays even. The silence stays even. They remain balanced. The space holds everything quietly. Nothing enters. Nothing leaves. Everything stays. Awareness rests. Without thought. Without shape. Time continues. Quietly. The warmth remains. The silence remains. Nothing else is required. The warmth remains. It stays unchanged. Unmoving. The silence stays with it. Without response. Nothing shifts. The light remains soft. It does not change. It does not fade. It stays. Nothing draws attention. Nothing releases it. Everything stays even. The warmth remains neutral. The silence remains neutral. They exist together. Without interaction. Time continues quietly. Without shape. Without direction. Moments do not separate. They do not gather. They pass. Nothing marks them. Awareness can remain low. Very low. There is no reason to rise. No reason to fall. It stays. The warmth remains steady. The silence remains steady. Nothing presses in. Nothing pulls away. The balance holds. The space feels unchanged. Not empty. Not full. Just present. Nothing forms. Nothing dissolves. Everything stays the same. The light does not move. It remains where it is. The silence remains where it is. Awareness does not need to follow. There is nothing to follow. Nothing happens. The warmth does not signal anything. The silence does not signal anything. They remain between. Time passes quietly. Without emphasis. Moments arrive. Moments dissolve. Nothing lingers. Nothing repeats. Nothing progresses. Everything continues. The space feels steady. Unmoving. Undisturbed. The warmth remains. The silence remains. Nothing reacts. Awareness softens. Without effort. There is no direction to hold. No direction to release. Everything stays loose. The light does not change. The silence does not change. They remain. Nothing is expected. Nothing is remembered. There is no need to notice anything. The warmth stays even. The silence stays even. They remain balanced. The space holds everything quietly. Nothing enters. Nothing leaves. Everything stays. Awareness rests. Without thought. Without shape. Time continues. Quietly. The warmth remains. The silence remains. Nothing else is required.